I was hoping to get the CTO of Brightly here today, but unfortunately you're going to have to settle for me. So DevOps is often misinterpreted. We've all seen the Venn diagram. Dev, ops, they're in silos. How do we get them to work together? So part of what DevOps proposes is that we build collaboration and processes so that these teams are more closely aligned. And we see the Venn diagram where we have that slight overlap. Sometimes we see proposals where teams are completely overlapped and we have the ops responsibilities put onto the dev teams. And many of us might know through experience that this does not work for teams. So if we've ever worked with developers that need to provision a subnet, it tends to not end well for them because they're not happy, they're not doing what they love, and so it turns out teams are most effective when they get to focus on what they're good at. So how do we solve that problem? And today I'm going to be talking about how we solved it with Brightly. I'm Shane Rowley. I'm a senior architect with Red Hat, and I've been in consulting for 11 years with Red Hat. And I mostly focus on strategic transformation engagements, and for the past year, I've been leading teams and accelerating with Brightly directly. So you might be wondering, who is Brightly? Essentially, they're smarter assets through software. They're actually one of the early pioneers of SaaS. They've been around for over 20 years, so in the late 90s, which I always find really impressive because you never hear the term SaaS until more recently, but they were there when I was back in elementary school. So some of the things that they do as part of their portfolio, they have maintenance management software, they have enterprise asset management, just to name a few. So being in the industry for so many years, they began as a private equity firm, and they acquired a lot of companies. So you can see the timeline down at the bottom, but essentially what happened here is that they have a very broad product suite of applications, and really all these applications are siloed from each other. So Brightly is stuck wondering, how do we pull out these capabilities, share them across our portfolio of products? To add to the complexity of that, within the past year, Brightly was also acquired by Siemens, and namely so that Siemens could leverage Brightly for their software capabilities and the products that they've built, and then integrate them with what Siemens is good at, and specifically around edge and IoT. So to summarize on Brightly's challenges, they have silo products with accrued technical debt. There's a desire of elastic product capabilities, so they want to build capabilities that can be adopted across their product portfolio. And also they want to be able to augment them with Siemens. Also, they have long lead times for delivery with that technical debt of the applications, and there was a bit of friction between the app dev and ops teams. So how do we get from an early model car to a high-performing car to build a high-performing organization? So I kind of like to think about organizations as cars. And so you can think about the teams as the drivetrains, and really I think about the people specifically as the engines that power those organizations. And when we think about engines in cars, and by the way, I'm referencing internal combustion engines, so I'm probably going to date myself in a bit here with ICE engine capabilities, but I know we're switching over to electric a lot, so just bear with me. But engines are very particular about how they can perform well for ICE engines. So you can see we have a dashboard for a car here. Up on the right side, we have what's called the tachometer, which measures the revolutions per minute for the engine. And the engine is very finicky on how it can perform. It likes an optimal range for revolutions to be able to perform well. So for example, with the low RPMs, the engine's lacking torque and it's not able to accelerate. And I tend to think about this as teams that are stuck in the weeds. They're focusing on things that aren't helping them to deliver what they need to, so they're not performing well. On the other end, you have the redlining. Here, the engine's unable to accelerate anymore, and if you push it too much, the engine's actually going to blow up. And really, I think about this as teams being burnt out. So how do you get teams to be performing in that optimal range? And really, that's where, for the engine, comes in the power band. Here, you get the maximum power from the engine with the balance of acceleration on demand, and this is really where we want our teams to be accelerating. So how do we do that with Brightly? We have platform of the future. And when I think of platform, I think about platform accelerators, and in terms of a car, I think about a transmission. So I'm gonna walk you through what Brightly's transmission is. In first gear, we have what every organization needs, which is a data center. So that's the racks, the servers, cooling, cabling. It doesn't matter if you're on-prem or in the cloud, every org needs this. You need it to get off the ground, but you're not gonna get very far with it. So in first gear, you can accelerate from 0, but you're not gonna go much further. So we need to shift gears into second gear. Here at Brightly, we have the AWS services, infrastructure as a service. So AWS allows you to provision these resources, such as compute, networking, access management, so that you can accelerate building things for your teams. And in second gear, we're able to get pretty far. You can build a lot, you can do a lot of cool things, but still, we're bogging down the teams, having to do all these individual teams. So it's good to build momentum, but we need something more. So I like to think about this as drive, and this is, for an engine and transmission, drive is that 1-to-1 ratio, so it's a perfect balance of acceleration plus maintaining velocity, and that's what we get with ROSA, which is Red Hat OpenShift on AWS. So we have a team managing and building out these platforms, and this is a good place to be because you could do a lot with the platform, teams are accelerated, but we could do better here, and so that's where we're shifting into overdrive. And that's where we have developer services with our internal developer platform. And so here, we're focusing on building out the dev experience with inner loop, outer loop, and automation around that so teams can quickly onboard and be successful in their delivery. Since we're talking about platforms, I want to talk about a concept with team topologies. And they introduce 4 types of teams. One is a stream-aligned team. This is a team that's aligned to a business domain, and they're focused on business features and capabilities. The second is an enabling team that is aligned to temporarily help that stream-aligned team focus on a complex obstacle that they might have. Then we have complicated subsystem teams, which are niche expertise areas. So you'll often hear in examples like machine learning or some complex computation, or maybe it's just a niche expertise that is needed in the org that it doesn't make sense to broadcast that knowledge across the entire org. And then finally, we have platform teams, and these are internal products, essentially. So your customers are internal to your organization. You're building the service or capability that is accelerating the delivery of other teams. So I'm going to walk you through what the team topology looks like at Brightly, or really the evolution of it. So first, we started with the Fellowship of the Pod, which is a team that built out the platform on ROSA. This team's focus is to build configuration management entirely through the Kubernetes API. So they provision all resources through the API using OpenShift operators and using Upbound, which is cross-plane productized. And they're doing this all through GitOps automation and providing it as a self-service capability for teams. They have everything as a service. So teams can provision namespaces, pipelines with Tekton, Kafka topics with AMQ streams, secrets provisioning and management integration with HashiCorp Vault, certificates provisioning, you have service mesh onboarding, database provisioning, basically you name it. It's all there, and they're adding new capabilities every day. So they're very advanced with what they're doing here. Next, we needed to onboard a team to the platform. It's not valuable enough to have a platform on its own. So you could see with the team topology, we have a stream-aligned team here that is consuming the platform capability. Now, specifically, this team was called Workstream 2. The focus was on inventory management. The Fellowship of the Pod was Workstream 1. So this team was aligned to build out an inventory management capability that would be consumed by the Brightly product portfolio suite. So they're building out APIs and capabilities around that. We quickly realized that we needed to build capabilities around developer experience, specifically starting with CI/CD. So we had a large team with the work stream with over 30 people. How do we get them accelerated so they could start to write and deploy code quickly? And that's where we came up with this team that we called the enablers. And their focus was on developer experience. And workstream 2, we started with domain discovery. So we used facilitation practices such as event storming and domain storytelling from Open Practice Library, and help to understand the business domain so that we could better align to what product needed. And with the enablers, we focused on building out the CI/CD process with the inner loop with automation, outer loop. We use tools like Helm and Tecton, and also built out golden path applications, which are essentially reference architectures on how your application can be successful on the platform. And this term, golden path, was popularized by Spotify, and this is what they use. Also, more recently, we began introducing Backstage, which is a developer portal where teams can literally go into a user experience and provision and scaffold their applications very quickly. After the domain discovery, we realized with the large team, we wanted to break it out into smaller domains. And so that's where we realized with the domains, we built out a team called In Demand that focused on technician requisitions, a team called Quartermasters, which focused on the traditional inventory experience. You can think like SKU lists, stock counts, et cetera. And then Zoho, which is a team focused on procuring new inventory, both for the technician requisitions as well as the inventory. These services are still business-aligned teams, and they deploy Quarkus microservices on the platform using the platform capabilities. Eventually, we realized there was a complex problem space around authorization that we needed, and that's where we spun out this new team called Access Denied. And really, they focused on this space where we introduced, Google has a paper called Zanzibar about relationship-based authorization as an approach. And they actually use this themselves with their services, but it's a special type of fine-grained authorization that is super complex for teams to adopt and understand. So they built this as a service and capability that encapsulates that specific domain knowledge, and then they're able to provide it for the other teams so that they can use that capability very easily to make sure that the right user has the right access at the right time. So again, this is what I see as a complicated subdomain that provides that capability. And then more recently, with the enablers as an enabling team, we realized that we wanted to shift them to a platform team model. So early on, we didn't get the adoption because it was seen the pipelines are a short-term effort. Once this team builds out the pipelines, they'll be able to roll off, and then we'll be fine. However, as that effort grew, we realized this is an ongoing initiative. The teams need to evolve. They need to keep building out capabilities. So now this is established as a long-term platform team where we have a product roadmap and backlog. We established a technical product owner as part of that team. And you could see that they're building and extending on the capabilities of the ROSA platform. So here, I have a technologies mind map, and this isn't a complete exhaustive map, but there's a lot of pieces here. Some of the things that I want to call out are the differentiators. We're using Quarkus for microservices. We have reactive development with those services, so that we can scale our services up quickly on demand with high user traffic. And for integration, we're using gRPC, Kafka with Debezium for a transaction outbox, and for fine-grained authorization, we're using SpiceDB. So some of the cool things, like with Debezium and coupled with reactive development, we realized we needed to make open source contributions to the Debezium project so that it could support reactive development. So we did that so we can move forward. This is one of the things, like being in the front of that adoption curve, having the platform capabilities, so you're not getting bogged down with the the little details, you can actually focus on being on that front end of the adoption curve and building out newer capabilities out on the bleeding edge. Some of the other tools that we're using, I think this is one of the coolest cases because with most of my customers, I don't get this opportunity, but we're actually using the entire umbrella of OpenShift products for application development. So serverless with Knative, we're using service mesh with Istio, pipelines with Tekton, and then GitOps with Argo. And some of the cool things is like with service mesh, we built out automated capabilities that when a team decides they want to onboard to the mesh, they just flip a switch with their onboarding, and they automatically get capabilities within the mesh for JOT token authentication and extracting those claims through HTTP headers. And then also REST to gRPC conversion because outside consumers might not support gRPC. So they get this out of the box with Envoy. We employed WASM plugins to be able to do that and wrote some customizations around it, which is pretty cool. Some of the other things that I want to call out are some of the process pieces that we implemented. So I mentioned earlier we started with domain-driven design, so we used facilitation practices to discover the domains, and then we implemented them technically with our services. Also, test-driven development to ensure that we're testing our code thoroughly and that it remains as testable code. And then behavior-driven development. So this is really important because one of the challenges that we have is aligning well with product and building out the scenarios and capabilities and then automating that through our process is very important to make sure that we're aligned with product. Also, we employed practices like mob and pair programming to ensure that the team stayed effective. And I do want to mention everything that was on that mind map, we've automated all of it. It's very impressive. So with all of this, I want you to meet the team. So I mentioned we had a very large team, and what's unique about it is it's cross-geo. So we have team members in India, in the US, and the UK. So how do we get them all to come together? And we had on-site sessions. I actually traveled to Noida and met all of the India team members directly, which was really cool. And one of the key things is that we focused on aligning services to business capabilities, and that allowed the teams to be autonomous and have loose coupling, so they're not tightly impacted by each other, and so they can deliver autonomously without that effect. One of the other things I want to mention is that we've adopted the high team collaboration, so the enablers, they're managing the dev services portal, and one of the teams, they wanted to spin up a .NET service, so we actually implemented an inner sourcing pattern where they were able to contribute back to the dev services platform and make the pipelines work with that. With the dev services, one of the things that we wanted to do is have a team charter so they could understand how do we interact with the organization. So first, we start with a consulting approach, and this is with 1 to 2 teams. They work closely with that team to understand specifically what the needs are, and they help guide that team to make decisions, align within the practices established within Brightly as an organization. And then beyond that, we want to pattern those capabilities. So as we start to scale out with 3 to 5 teams, we want to make sure we common it back into developer services so that other teams can more easily adopt it. And then at scale, we think about how do we make those practices that we've commoned scale out so that numerous teams across the org can adopt it. And then also, how do we broadcast those capabilities out? So we're doing things like tech talks and hackathons, et cetera. So I want to end here with the onboarding lead times. Prior to all of this, we started with the manual provisioning, and this would take many months for a team to onboard. And this is going from nothing to a full infrastructure scaled out for all the way to production. With AWS services, that lead time was able to drop down to about a month. And then with the ROSA platform, we were able to bring that lead time down to 1 to 2 weeks. And then finally, with developer services, We can onboard teams so they can have applications scaffolded to deploy to production within less than a day. And often this is within a few hours. Most of that time is really just spent with them understanding some of the technical intricacies, but all the automation is very quick. So I want to thank you for allowing me to present. If you come find me, feel free to ask questions. I'd love to chat. And also, I just want to plug on Wednesday at 1 p.m., I believe, the Fellowship of the Pod team is going to be presenting on the platform in more detail. So I encourage you to go visit that presentation. Thank you.